Well, hello, everyone. My name is Steve Katsouros. I am the president of the Come to Believe Network and Foundation, and I'm in my office at CTV in New York City. I'm talking to my friend and brother Jesuit, Eric Immel. Eric, why don't you do an intro for yourself?
It's good to be with everybody. I'm Father Eric Immel, newly ordained as of June 11th, 2022, and I met Father Katsouros at some point early in his time in Chicago. So I worked for 3 years as the assistant and then associate dean for student success at Arrupe College. Other things in my Jesuit life, studies in Chicago and at Boston College, a couple of years in the Twin Cities, some summers in India and Ecuador and the Rosebud Indian Reservation and kind of all over the place. But Arrupe was my apostolic home during my time in formation for those 3 years especially. So great to be with everybody.
And Eric, what are you doing now?
I'm a vocation promoter for the Midwest province of the Society of Jesus. So for those of you that are used to the urban life, get a load of this caseload. North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, Iowa, Western Wisconsin, and then just for good measure, they tacked on Cincinnati and Kentucky. So I spend my days traveling through those different parts of our province, asking guys if they are being called to religious life in the Society of Jesus. It's been very good, very fruitful.
Excellent. Well, all right, I'm going to call your attention now to this interview, and I know that our viewers and friends will really enjoy what you have to say. So you've said this a little bit already, but speak a little bit more in detail about your origin story at Arrupe. What drew you to Arrupe? We were just getting this off the ground during the same time that you were a collegian, that you were studying philosophy and theology. So why did you work at Arrupe?
Yeah, my background is in higher education administration. And so when we were in first studies at Loyola Chicago, there was an invitation to find some kind of ministry. And for my first couple of years, I was at Chicago Jesuit Academy on the city's west side, working with boys from the ages of, 3rd grade to 8th grade. And that was really good. But it was a long haul out to the west side. And so I started exploring different opportunities for ministry. I think, Father K, you showed up in Chicago at the beginning of my 2nd year and laid all of this groundwork for what would become Arrupe College. And then you solicited guys in formation to come and volunteer. And so a couple of us in the First Studies program decided, well, let's see what it's about. Let's see what's going on. And I'm not kidding. Within 10 minutes of being in that place, I maybe unhealthily had said, I will work here someday. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. My background in Jesuit higher education, plus my desire to accompany especially young people from, I'm not sure the language that we're using now, divested communities in the city of Chicago, students who really have the talents, the chops for higher education, but for many compounding reasons didn't have access. I thought this is the greatest thing. So I spent that first year mostly sitting and waiting for people to come up to me. And I'm not a shy person, so sometimes I would force my way into their atmospheres and help them write papers, help outline, really tutor in any kind of capacity. In the springtime, there was an invitation to actually teach a course. And so I did that with another Jesuit scholastic. It seemed to me that the students got along with me well, that I got along with the students. The professional relationships I was building were fruitful and helpful. And so when it came time to discern regency, Arrupe College was on the table, and my skills plus my interest made it a good fit. So I ended up getting mission there for 3 years.
Okay, great. So you said like within 10 minutes, you knew that this was the place you wanted to be. Talk about that a little bit more, unpack that for us. What about Arrupe's culture, about the students, were just so confirming for you?
Yeah. This is language that I have come up with after the fact. But what I can tell you now is that my general experience of higher education is that it's a pretty intense environment. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of high achieving young people. I spent professional time at Creighton University before I entered the Jesuits. Their strength quest #1 was ambition. I mean, these are hard-driven, hard-working young people. But Jesuit higher education invite something different. And I think what I saw immediately at Arrupe College was not just the intensity of a very robust college program, but also just by nature of the design, by nature of the faculty model, by nature of the student support. The intensity was coupled with a very deep intimacy, a very deep sense of relationality, a deep sense of companionship, a deep sense of care for the other person. And I think sometimes in our big institutional environments, that intimacy gets very lost. It gets very buried. And at Arrupe College, I thought there's a chance to be intimately linked with the lives of everybody here. And I do think that after 3 years, I mean, for better or for worse, it was not always easy, but there was a deep intimacy in that space. And that's, I think, what rooted the work that I tried to accomplish at Arrupe College. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's really what I've come to after a couple of years away from Arrupe. So
super. All right. So you talked about subbing for a professor who was out of maternity, and you're when you were a collegian, you're assigned there to be a regent, which in Jesuit language is generally 2 or 3 years in a Jesuit institution, working full time, and you were definitely working full time. You transitioned from assistant to associate dean for student success. So what gifts and challenges presented themselves as you took on this role and really became a leader at Arrupe?
That's a great question. In fact, this is the hardest that you're posing to answer because it happened very quickly. I had a really lovely community of coworkers when I first started at Arrupe College. I did not have anybody reporting to me. I had a very, for lack of a better term, a pretty clear set of responsibilities, and I think I was thriving in them. So when I first started, I was working on student organizations. I was helping to continue to build a retreats program, an orientation program. I was also teaching. So all of that felt sort of manageable in the spirit of Arrupe College, which sometimes, as you remember, felt very sort of unmanageable. It's like, what is happening here? But we made it through. And then there was a shift in personnel, and very quickly, the Jesuits responsible for my formation and some colleagues at Arrupe College were affirming that perhaps moving into the associate dean position would be good for me. And so after some discernment and after application, I was given that position. And really what changed was the responsibility to be more administrative facing, to be more professional staff facing than student facing. My first job was very much all about the students. And I think that was the greatest challenge for me. Was I got into a rhythm of being with and for the students all day, every day, but then having to sort of adjust where my gaze was at Arrupe College, try to support professional staff. I had always been on the dean's leadership group, but having some much more concrete responsibilities and having some much more concrete decision-making responsibilities, especially. But at the end of the day, the associate dean for student success, at least as I did the job and understood the job, was to adjust the day to the most pressing need. Because we needed an environment of stability for everybody else there. So if something was out of line, if something was confusing, if there was a student of particular concern, as you often said, my job was to be the most unpredictable person in the building so that everything else could continue to move smoothly. And that all increased when I became the associate dean. I mean, there was no telling what would happen each day.
So you've been using language like with and for students, relationship, intimacy. These are all kind of synonyms for what we Jesuits call Cura Personalis, care for the whole person. So, again, unpack how Cura Personalis, how you experienced that at Arrupe, and an anecdote or a story about a student it would be appropriate here. You can change their names like I did in my book, but all right.
I don't know if I can do that on the fly, but it's been years. So these students, and they know I love them. So yeah, Cura Personalis. Well, here I think of two stories. One, I'll call her JoJo. I had a long day, and I've told this story before. I had a long day. It was probably 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night by the time I felt like I could actually put things down, get on the train, and head back to my Jesuit community. But right at the end of my day, right as I was getting my stuff packed up, I heard a little knock on the door. And it was JoJo. And she said, "Hey, Dean," they called me Dean Eric. I don't know how that happened, but that's what happened. "Dean Eric, do you have a minute?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." I mean, Cura Personalis meant that there was an immediate need. I mean, people often did not knock on my door unless there was something particular. And in this case, there wasn't a specific issue or incident, but this young person, this young student, she just needed a space to process some of what was going on in her life. And it was a beautiful conversation. It probably lasted an hour. And the reason I remember this story so clearly, I had lots of conversations like that with students, lots of conversations where they just needed an opportunity to meander through the lived experience that they've had in the context of their desires for a different future. At the end of the conversation, JoJo said, Dean Eric, I'm so sorry for being such a burden to you." As if her asking for my time that evening was anything other than exactly what I wanted to do. Now, was I tired? Yes. Could I have said, JoJo, why don't you make an appointment and we can sit down tomorrow? Yeah, I could have done that. Professionally, maybe there was a better boundary that I could have set, if I'm being perfectly frank. But in that hour, she was able to speak her truth. She was able to be called by her name, which is oftentimes something that doesn't happen in different environments. She was able to just begin and continue to unpack her real experience in a safe and comfortable environment. So the willingness to just give that extra time, regardless of my own needs, I think is one way that Cura Personalis lived out. And then I think of just a smattering of other things. I mean, some of the things that I felt compelled to do in my professional role were sort of ridiculous. I mean, we had a student experiencing homelessness at one point who found a great opportunity for a different place to live. But the logistics of making that happen were nightmarish. And I tend to be a little impatient. And so at the end of the day, I was just like, you know what? I'm done with this. Here's a credit card. Go to Target, get dishes, get plates. I'll go back to my community. I'm going to get the pickup truck. We're loading your stuff up and I'm driving you over to this new place. So, I mean, I moved this student out of a very unpleasant, very dangerous, very unhealthy home environment into a place where I think that student was able to finally have some footing and start thriving. Now, there's probably, again, professionally, a better way to make all of that happen, but it's the most unpredictable job in the building. You just kind of do it. And as a Jesuit, without familial obligations, without some of the concerns that really hardworking people who are not in religious life have, I just thought, well, this is what I'm called to do right now. So yeah, it's moments like that, accompanying students to different issues in the hospital. I mean, students dealing with really complicated mental health issues and just being with them and dropping everything to say, you are my most important person right now. This is where I need to be. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I think of. Those are the moments that I remember. Yeah. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your questions, but this is where I'm compelled. So
that's fine. Why don't we shift? You mentioned retreats a moment ago. So, and that was kind of one of your areas of responsibility. So in retreats and also, orientation, as Associate Dean for Student Success, that's also your baby as well. So talk about why retreats, why orientation were so important for Arrupe, and particularly in terms of building community.
Yeah. I'm of the mind that the learning that has to happen around being a college student, what I mean is the learning about how does the schedule work? How do you register for classes? How do I negotiate the holds that are on my record? All of those things are important, and we have to pin those things very early in a student's college experience in order to prepare them for engaging their full set of resources. But those things also come over time. And those resources are always there. They're always in the ether of an institutional environment. My my sense of opportunities to gather students in large groups, and especially at the orientation program, is that they're going to spend a lot of time in a university environment in their heads. That's just what it is. It's learning, it's intellectual. And so I really felt compelled that when we had our students together in a critical mass, we needed to engage the heart as well. And so I think our orientation program was designed like a retreat program so that students who had been there, students who had been in the exact seat that those first year students were in, could share a little bit about their lives and their stories. I think that once we see our own experience reflected in the story of another person, the heart grows, the commitment deepens, intimacy is built to couple and to sometimes sort of soothe the intensity of the environment. Now, it's not always comfortable. I mean, I put these students in little dorm rooms at a retreat center with each other. They don't know each other. They've maybe never shared a room before. You know, the food at the place we used was very homegrown. I mean, salad bar. And it's like, what is all of this? I mean, the students really took a chance on us, I think, in putting themselves in a safe, but maybe uncomfortable environment. But the retreats in the orientation program were, to use an Ignatian term, we're designed as a school of the heart, right? We're a school of the mind. So where does the heart come into play, and how does that help concretize the relationships and the intimacy of our space? I mean, it really is community. Even something simple like branding the experience, right? Call it the spirit of Arrupe, put that in a hashtag and let people use that language. We had this silly little cheer. I don't know where it came from. I might have made it up off the top of my head, honestly. And it's still going. I still see Instagram posts that this go, Arrupe. I mean, it's a thing that is in many ways arbitrary, but those are identity markers that give people a sense of belonging. And so that's sort of the design of the retreat and orientation programs as I understood it. Now, I'm sure they've changed, and that's great. I mean, things move and live and change, and that's fine. But yeah, we had a good time with those things. Yeah.
Terrific. All right. You know, we required orientation for all incoming students, right? And now when I'm talking to universities around the country, we sort of identify what are the non-negotiables. Like, in order to be this model, you have to have A, B, C, whatever it is. So what do you think are the non-negotiable components of an Arrupe College model? And particularly, what's most critical for students, for your area, for student success?
That's a great question. You know, depending on the especially economic backgrounds of the students that people might be trying to recruit into this model school, I think the essentials of life and the stability of the essentials of life is really important. So, I mean, the computer is really important, even though they break sometimes. And even though, yeah, they're not the greatest machines on planet Earth, we've got to know that you have the technology you need to be successful in the classroom. And I will hustle to make sure that thing is fixed so that you have that stability. The meals program. I mean, just to have breakfast and lunch, I think, is really essential as well. Students are commuting from all over the city. Students, I mean, who knows what kind of stability in terms of food and sustenance they have in their home. No judgment. Most of the students came from really good, solid families with good intentions. But even still, just having that layer of comfort and safety, having someone who can call you by your name when you get your breakfast, I mean, those are really important things. So some of those are non-negotiable. I think, I'm not sure again what the language is, but the very intimate advising model, I think, is also a non-negotiable. You need to have a layer of support that doesn't live in emails, quite frankly. You need to have a layer of support attached to a human person who knows your story, who knows where you've been, knows what you're good at, knows what you're talented at, and can walk with you intimately. This is not a concrete thing, but I also think a non-negotiable is a deep commitment to assets-based and not deficits-based language. I mean, it's very easy to say, these are the things you do not have. And so here, our little savior college can give you these things. That's not the model. The model is, these young people are tremendously gifted and talented. What are their assets? What are their gifts? What are their strengths? What gives them joy? What sets their heart on fire? And how can we use those things to let good things run wild? And so when it comes to non-negotiable programs, spaces where students can begin to cultivate those strengths. I think of our freshman seminar, which in many ways was a headache because the schedule was pretty rigid. And so it had to be either at, I think, 7:45 a.m. or it had to be at 5:30 p.m. But sort of a non-competitive, non-academic space that got to the heart of some of these gifts and talents. Those are non-negotiable things, I think. I think a robust program of liberal arts is non-negotiable because it's an invitation to learn how to think critically, to learn how to reason with the world, to learn how to point at the world and say, you know what, it doesn't have to be that way. And here's the evidence for it. And I got that through the learning that I experienced in my college environment. So those are also non-negotiables. I think I'm a little out of the concrete here, forgive me, but there's a
Very
lot.
concrete.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
That's great. Yeah. All right. So, I mean, you know my job now, Eric. I talk to a lot of university leaders around the country who are, considering implementing our model, our work. They've heard about, Arrupe through the years, and they're looking for guidance on how they do it on their campuses. How would you advise them in terms of implementation?
Do it. Yeah, don't wait. If you've got the money and you've got the space, do it. But my particular advice would be, and again, this is sort of after the fact. On the one hand, Arrupe College was so lucky to have a very concrete, cultivated physical space to call its home. I think that's really important. But one of my pieces of advice would be that if you are inviting this kind of college model into a larger university environment, integrate it into that larger university environment as much as possible. There are resources at large institutions that simply cannot be recreated at the small college model. We could never have recreated a library because that's a space, that's a professional staff person to cultivate the collections at that library. You can't do that. We could never have built our own campus recreation center. I think at one point, I probably didn't bring this to you. At one point, we were daydreaming about like a basketball court on the roof of McGuire.
I remember that.
Come on, great idea. It would be awesome. The skyline, it would have been spectacular, but we don't have time for that. We don't have money for that. We have money to put into the non-negotiables that make students successful at Arrupe College. So integration into the larger campus community is essential. I think that destigmatizes what Arrupe College could come off as. And I think it gives them more direct access to the kind of college environment we're inviting them to if they transition into a four-year degree program. So integration. We faced a lot of issues with Arrupe students feeling like they did not belong at the larger Loyola community. And that still pains me. Because if we don't do enough to create a safe environment wrapped around the very safe place that we create intimately at Arrupe College, it's just not going to work as well. So the geography, I think, is really important. The very explicit campus partnerships, those things need to be in place. And I mean, the financial model might look a little different. The style or the timbre of the student might look a little different. But at the end of the day, if you're in charge of campus recreation, welcome these 200, 400 new students who are a part of this community. If you're a part of helping run student organizations, well, say hello to the 400 newest students of your institution and give them a chance to be a part of these organizations. I really think my best advice would be to integrate as much as possible, while also, I guess, maintaining a unique identity for these students and a unique community. But they've got to have access to the larger environment. That's how their worldviews, I think, grow in the context of education. So
Eric, you moved on from Arrupe 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, right? 2019.
That's right.
How does Arrupe continue to influence you and your work, your ministry now?
Oh, I mean, in untold ways. I mean, I think I don't want to objectify the Arrupe College students here when I say what I'm going to say, but the truth is that I heard and saw things at Arrupe College that I had never heard or seen before. The students really do live an incredibly rich, incredibly complicated, and at times incredibly challenging life. And so the things that were brought to me, they've just been, I wish most of those things that I'm talking about, I'm being a little veiled here. Most of those things I wish had never happened. You know, some of the crises, some of the real difficulty in relationships, in home life regarding mental health. I mean, I wish those things had not happened, but the truth is that they do happen, and they happen at every college and university. It's just that Arrupe is such an intimate model that we see those things pretty clearly. Those conversations, hearing and seeing those things, has made me a better minister, full stop. Nothing surprises me anymore. I mean, you know, someone's lingering in the sacristy at a church I've never been to and says they want to talk to Father. It's like, okay, well, I guess that's me now. And I mean, who knows what they have on their mind, on their heart? Who knows what they're going to say? I'm not fazed. I mean, I'm sure there's something out there that could startle me, but at this point, it hasn't happened. And I think a lot of that is rooted in the gift of the diversity of Arrupe College. I think, you know, what it means to show up and what it means to make hard decisions about showing up. I think knowing what to focus on knowing what to focus on and when to focus on it. There were days when I spent, 15 hours helping one person. And I would think at the end of the day, was that the best way for me to use my time, given this huge project that we have? And sometimes it was, and sometimes it wasn't. So to have a discerning heart about where our energy goes, that's been huge for me. I think also boundaries. I mean, this is something I learned the hard way, but, when we're in sort of a really intense environment, there's got to be space to step away from it. There's got to be layers of support so that you're not alone in the work, that I'm not alone in the work. That's been really helpful to me. And I think just in terms of preaching and sacramental life, with all due respect to the stories of the students, I mean, there's just a wealth of opportunity to bring the stories of people that I met at Arrupe College into the bigger church that I'm a part of, and to let those stories continue to shape the minds and hearts of people who otherwise may never have that kind of encounter. And so, yeah, I mean, it is, for better or for worse, it's the bedrock of my Jesuit formation. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, and it's the best thing I've ever done. And so that to me is a win-win, that to me is a win-win. So.
Wow. Well, Eric, what a joy it was for me to work with you, to build Arrupe with you and our colleagues and our students. And really what a joy it's been to speak with you today. So thanks for sharing your experience, your wisdom, and to be continued.
Absolutely. Anything I can do, to accompany your work, I'm all in.
Thanks, Eric.